Rolling. Good deal. So first we wanted to take a moment to thank the many of you who support our COTAD organization and those who are donors. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and thank you for making events like this and future initiatives possible for us by supporting our events and donating. Perfect. So tonight we will continue our welcome here, and then at 6:15 we will roll into our presentations, which I'm so excited for. We have 3 presenters this evening. We will have 5 minutes for questions following each presentation, and then we'll move into our discussion breakout group. So this will be a really nice opportunity for you to continue to discuss thoughts you may have had. Feel free to write things down during our presentations that you want to discuss with others in those groups, share ideas, share challenges you are experiencing in your home programs, and allow that to be a really nice opportunity for you to connect with others. And then we'll come back to our large group and we'll have our closing. You can follow our different COTAD initiatives on our social media pages, and thank you to Devlin New and Michelle De Jesus who are monitoring those different platforms for us. So to kick off an introduction to our Ignite series, I would like to welcome Dr. Arame Anverisade, who is going to give us some information about the history of this awesome series. Arame, are you ready to roll?
I am ready to roll.
Awesome. So Arame is a co-founder of COTAD. She is also our vice chair on the executive board, and she is the coordinator for our COTAD chapters. So thank you, Dr. Arame Anverisade.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And we're so excited for you to be leading the Ignite Series 2. You're doing a fantastic job already. So thank you for welcoming me, and thank you to everyone on here today. So welcome everyone. We hope you are having a lovely week. It is 110 plus degrees in Los Angeles right now, but we hope that everyone's having an amazing week. We are so excited about Ignite 2. You are absolutely in for a treat, and I cannot wait for all of you to hear what our amazing speakers have in store for us today. I'm a fan of all, so I cannot wait. Ignite is a series based on empowerment, mobilization, and most of all, action. We established Ignite in June as the anti-racist movement was in full steam. My idea for the first series was to truly ignite change through establishing dialogue about anti-racism and police brutality and its impact on our daily occupations, including our mental health. Besides having discussion, it was also a call to action. And from that, we had 4 amazing events between June through August. In 2 months, we had such amazing events with wonderful turnout. And it looked really at the need for occupational therapy to address anti-racism and anti-Blackness all across the board. From these conversations we were having, and based a lot on dialogue with our students, particularly from our COTAD chapters, as well as with faculty from across the nation, a common theme really became apparent. And that theme was systemic barriers in occupational therapy education. Students felt determined to be heard and share what they want to see change within programs, and program directors and deans were trying their best to respond in a timely manner and understand the concerns of the students. We started having a larger discussion within COTAD, and we really started thinking about what if we have this Ignite 2, right? And really the conversation we were having was, are our students equipped with the tools to really truly understand the policies and procedures in the process of trying to develop sustainable change in institutional barriers, with institutional barriers? But also we wanted to respond to faculty who also had a deep desire to address these concerns. So how do we look at curriculum, instruction, evaluation, and programmatic policies in a more holistic way? Thus, we have Ignite 2, Action for Inclusion in Occupational Therapy Education. And this series will be catered to academia. So today, we dive into programmatic challenges related to racism and discrimination and explore ways to start the conversation about establishing a more diverse, a more inclusive, and a more equitable curriculum for all students to succeed. So with that, that's a little bit of history of how Ignite got started and why Ignite will continue, because as the name says, we want to continue to ignite change. Thank you so much.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Enverizade. That was a fantastic introduction. And to help those of you who might not be super familiar with COTAD, I wanted to ask our founding and current director, Dr. Catherine Hoyt, to share a few words about COTAD.
Has a busy schedule, especially with semesters about to start. If I saw a couple people in early intervention, so I know this can be a hectic time of year in early intervention as well, with children aging out and all new caseloads coming in. So thank you for spending your time with us. And if you've been with us earlier in the summer, thank you for sticking around and continuing the conversation as we move towards increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the education setting. Of course, I think we all agree this is where it all begins. This is how we develop a diverse workforce, when we invest in our students and in the future of our educational body. So just for a little bit of background, in case you haven't heard of COTAD before, or if this is your first event, COTAD first came together as friends in 2013, and after a presentation at AOTA in 2014, with the Emerging Leaders Development Program, we decided that this was a topic that had a lot of interest, and a lot of people wanted to learn more, wanted to get involved, but there wasn't a place to do it. So in 2014, we came together as the Coalition of Occupational Therapy Advocates for Diversity. And since then, we've been coalescing interests across the country and around the world to bring people together to move towards the areas that they're passionate in. And that is, one of those areas is education. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll just give a brief overview of the different areas of COTAD. Oh, well, I'll do this first. Okay, so in last October, actually, we were pretty excited to bring our executive board together to reimagine what our mission and our vision were. We started just as a small group thinking, you know, we would like to do some things, but now we're thinking much bigger. Our mission is to empower occupational therapy leaders to engage in practices that increase diversity, equity, and inclusion for a more transformative occupational therapy profession, with a vision that occupational therapy will be accessible, inclusive, and effective for all populations that we serve. Thank you, Stephanie. So if you are interested in any of these different areas beyond education, please go to our website or contact us at cotad2015@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to connect you with the appropriate leaders of these different initiatives. The COTAD Chapters program is led by Dr. Enverizade, who just spoke, and it's a nationwide program where we're engaging students to be their own leaders, to become the leaders of tomorrow in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We envision that the COTAD Chapters program provides the local capacity for students to engage in these kinds of conversations, address the needs at their local institutions, because while we can have these conversations nationally, we recognize that locally, everywhere is going to have unique needs and unique topics that need to be addressed in diverse ways. So the COTAD Chapters program is a way for all students to feel engaged and connected and have a safe space to connect with others and engage in these conversations. COTAD-ED is led by Lexi and Stephanie, who were introduced in the beginning of this session, and founded by Cristina, Reyes Smith. COTAD-ED serves the purpose of uniting faculty members, educators, and researchers across the country and world to discuss how we can improve diversity, equity, and inclusion among occupational therapy practitioners and improving that academic environment. So we're really excited that this series is now being hosted by COTAD-ED. The COTAD Minority Mentorship Program is one of the most important legs of, well, I shouldn't say most important, but a very influential component of the Coalition of Occupational Therapy Advocates for Diversity. It's currently led by Megan Lambert, Dr. Lambert, and Helen Valencia, and they've been doing an excellent job, and we now have over 80 active dyads in that mentorship program. We are always seeking new mentors. Students come to us all the time looking for somebody just to get a little bit of extra support or validation or guidance in the path that they're going towards. And a lot of times we find that those students are seeking somebody that's had a similar lived experience to them. So if you have any interest at all, no matter what your background may be, if your practice area is something that you would like to share and discuss about, students come to us with a variety of different interests. So please connect with us if you have interest in being a mentor. And then, sorry, I think the slide moved. And then the last area is our kind of newest thing happening with COTAD. It's called COTAD Community. Last year, or this year, but last year's AOTA conference, we rolled out our first COTAD community project in conjunction with the annual conference in Boston. Unfortunately, because of circumstances with COVID, we weren't able to do that project in person, but I'm delighted to share that 4 emerging leaders from our COTAD Chapters program have now developed into the leaders of our COTAD community project. And they were still able to raise over $700 and put together, I think it was over 1,000 different items for a women's shelter in Boston. We are currently underway in our planning stages for COTAD Community San Diego, which we are planning for it to be a more local and engaged event so that regardless of where we may be next April, we'll be able to engage with our communities around us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think that was a little bit longer than I was supposed to take, but reach out to us for anything that you may need. Thank you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. So again, what brings us here tonight, this is our second series. So please keep an eye on our events. Tonight, we initiate our first of our Action for Inclusion in OT Education. We'll have a second session focused on fieldwork challenges and a third focused on pathway models to support perspective and how we support current OT students. So please keep an eye. We'll have our final slide share the date for our session 2, but again, follow our media for those dates. As we begin this evening, we can move on to the next slide, Stephanie. I would like you all to just please take a moment to examine the various items included in this community agreement. So on behalf of COTAD, we would really like all of you to please agree to adhering to this agreement. And for any of you who may teach, if you're not already using an agreement in your classrooms, this could be something to create with your students together in how you would like to have things carried out or how those participate in your classroom, or you could consider using it for groups you might be a part of. So with that, we are moving into our presentations. I'm so excited. So tonight we will open up and we will hear from Dr. Khalilah Johnson. Dr. Johnson is an assistant professor of occupational science and occupational therapy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Johnson, take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And good evening to everyone. Before we dig in, I just want to say thank you to my dear friends in COTAD for the invitation to speak alongside Drs. Beal and Smith this evening. To my colleagues in the Division of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at UNC School of Medicine. I did see a few of you pop in. So thank you so much for your unyielding support and commitment to equitable and inclusive OT education. And then to all of you for your steadfast devotion to COTAD and this Ignite series and to enhancing responsiveness in the OT community. Next slide, please. Now, before I share what faculty are doing in our division at UNC, I believe it's really important to situate our program in the broader landscape of the academic community. Now, just days ago, an article was published in the Chronicle of Higher Education entitled, "How Racist Are Universities Really?" The author explains that it is well documented that universities are sites of cultural battles over iconography and other historical relics, the propriety of taking race into account in admissions, and a corporatized consumerism that integrates pedagogy and white privilege. And by now, we know and understand that colleges and universities uphold and perpetuate white supremacy at all levels. The biases and actions aren't implicit. Rather, the violence that the people who walk the halls and the grounds experience is very explicit. And not only is it explicit, it's persistent. And I believe in order for OT programs to create authentic learning communities in which students, and underrepresented students in particular, can thrive, then universities as a whole must make the same commitment to redress and remedy the structural racism that they reproduce and benefit from. Now, UNC fortunately and maybe unfortunately, has been in the news in recent years. Obviously, we've been in the news very recently about COVID, but that aside, we've been in the news in recent years for our problematic history and commingling with white supremacists, but also our very public commitment to righting these wrongs with marginalized faculty, staff, and students, and the Chapel Hill and Carrboro communities in its strategic plans. These plans include several initiatives like Carolina Next, the Roadmap to Racial Equity, and the Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward. Essentially, these initiatives prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion, and the investment in policies, systems, and infrastructure that promote belonging, accountability, and transparency throughout the university community. Now, this commitment also included $5 million of support that was approved by our Board of Trustees. And whereas I appreciate the capital behind these initiatives, $5 million is not a drop in the bucket for a school like UNC. So as a Black female faculty member in our main university there at Chapel Hill, I have to question if $5 million is sufficient. Is it sufficient enough for faculty of color, staff of color, students of color, and so forth? And really, what does $5 million do for 30,000 plus students alone? And in addition to the more structured systems level initiatives, our leadership team also instituted a University Diversity Council, which includes diversity officers and liaisons across campus. And so this member group is tasked with systematically examining university policies, practices, and traditions, and develop comprehensive plans to address issues that are identified by Carolina community members. But again, if these practices aren't supported by sufficient and consistent capital, then are these efforts really authentic or rather symbolic? Now, these same initiatives have been taken up in strategic plans and policies of our graduate schools and School of Medicine, all the way down through our Department of Allied Health Sciences. But they're also tailored to include mandatory bias and diversity trainings, specific programming to promote justice and enhance racial diversity in our academic programs, research programs, and residencies, and the targeted recruitment and hiring of faculty, including people like myself, staff, and students from underrepresented racial groups. These policies and initiatives are public facing, meaning that the School of Medicine and Department of Allied Health specifically have made it visible for what they're doing and the associated monies needed to see these programs through. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, like many other programs that are represented here tonight, we at UNC Division of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy have made intentional efforts to address structural racism, discrimination, and other blind spots that directly impact diversity, racial equity, inclusion, and the educational experiences of all of our students in general. DEI is prioritized in our strategic plan in both our immediate and long-term goals for the division. And laying out DEI efforts in Black and white requires that programs actually do something about it, right? They actually have to put strategies into practice and measure the outcomes. That way it guides every decision, every curriculum design and redesign, every classroom activity, and every interaction with students. And although anti-racism and anti-discrimination strategies aren't stated explicitly in our plan, we have made a commitment to this type of work. It is, diversity is a primary heading on our website, and the specific activities of our faculty and students related to that are often featured on our homepage. It also outlines how our efforts at the division and university level have impacts on diversity in the OT workforce in North Carolina. And so if you have a chance to visit our website, you can check out the PowerPoint conference presentation on increasing diversity that was done by Dr. Lynn Wakeford and Raquel Fisher. Now, recognizing the economic and educational implications of transitioning to the OTD as a single point of entry for practitioners, which disproportionately impacts prospective students of color, we decided that we would maintain our Master's of Science degree and offer the post-professional OTD in the future. Additionally, we formally and publicly argued to the Representative Assembly why this transition would be detrimental to workforce diversity. Our argument noted to minimize the effort, effect, and service of an OT with a master's degree in light of the work of those with OTDs is divisive and presumptive. And we still need more than one path to keep the opportunities open to individuals from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. And I make this point to demonstrate that it's not enough to make decisions at conference tables behind closed doors. Your stance as a program must be firm and it must be known. Advocacy is not in addition to our work as educators, it's inherent in our work. Dr. Litt, I mentioned before, tracks and analyzes our MSOT admissions. That way, we make informed decisions on how effective our admissions practices are and for whom, how well we are implementing our own policies and practices around application reviews and that whole entire process. Determine if we're evaluating our admissions process with depth and clarity and holistically, and how we use that data to pivot so that we're actually following a holistic admissions model. Now, the literature shows that using a holistic process in admissions enhances diversity in academic programs, and it improves academic learning environments, including how consistencies with our mission and challenge any pedagogical practices that may prove to be problematic.
Khalilah, I'm so sorry. I think we lost you for a little bit. I'm sorry. Was everyone else hearing the loss of? Okay, so I think at the last we could hear was when you were discussing how you revamped your admission procedures to make them more holistic and the research behind the value of holistic admission.
Okay, yeah, sure. I was just saying that that a holistic process has been shown to enhance diversity of students who are admitted to OT programs. But not only that, but that it also improves learning environments of those students. It enhances their engagement on their campus communities, but also the broader communities of these universities, and teamwork, openness to new ideas, and so forth. And also just made the point that those are attributes that we seek to impress upon our students. So if you aren't using a holistic model right now, I definitely encourage you to discuss that with your faculty members at your universities. So going back to, and I guess maybe you all didn't hear this as well, but in our division, we review our policies and curriculum for any omissions and inconsistencies with our mission, and challenge any pedagogical practices that may prove to be problematic. For example, we assessed readings and activities in our syllabi for cultural biases, address lack of representation of theoretical perspectives from the Global South, discuss and then plan for the support needs of our Black, Latinx, and Asian students, and grapple with the fact that my experience in the classroom will differ from my white counterparts. I have to give extra thought to how I show up, and here that is how Black can I show up. Do I wear my hair natural or not? Do I dress how I want or how I think people believe I should dress? Do I bear my tattoos or not? How much detail do I need to provide to assert my expertise so that my PhD and 14 years of clinical experience isn't called into question? How much can I challenge our learners without someone filing a complaint? How Black can my online profiles present? And then there's the extra responsibility I feel to show up in many ways, and also will show up in many ways for our Black students and other students of color, but also to protect them. Because I know that the same mental gymnastics that I have to perform in front of the classroom, they do the same from where they're sitting. Another area where I feel we fall short not just at UNC, but where we fall short across many OT programs is how we support faculty, staff, and students of color across our campus. Whereas I am valued and receive support in various ways as a faculty member in my division, my experiences as Black faculty at UNC differ greatly once I actually leave our office suite. And I won't even say Bondurant Hall, because even inside those walls, many individuals, even those who self-identify as anti-racist, have made it very clear that my presence isn't welcome in spaces they believe I shouldn't be. So our work must go beyond our immediate environments if we truly want to dismantle the structural racism and discrimination that infiltrates our programs. And so what I want to leave you all with is a quote that is taken directly from our statement of commitment to justice, equity, and action. And it reads, "The profession of occupational therapy is not immune from structural racism that continues to plague our country. We are committed to confronting racism wherever it hides and to doing the work necessary to demand change in our practices, our institutions, our research, and our classrooms. As a division, we commit to ongoing anti-racist work among our faculty, in our classrooms, and in our community, within our state in the form of curricular development, workshops, social and societal engagement, and ongoing reflection to prepare ourselves, practitioners, and our graduates to catalyze change in response to injustice. And we invite you all to do the same." And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We would like to open the floor now for about 5 minutes of questions for those of you who have them. Any questions for Dr. Johnson?
Dr. Johnson, we got one in the chat, and it, one second, I lost it here. The question is, do you think that tenure requirements and merit criteria for faculties or instructors influence the willingness of teachers to broach diversity, equity, and inclusion topics in the classroom and talk politics?
Okay, so is the question asking that those topics are avoided because it may impact whether or not you get tenure? I'm trying to read between the lines there. I think that's the question.
I think that's the question too. Feel free to speak up, anybody, if you'd like to clarify.
Because I think that's what I'm hearing. Like, do we broach these very sensitive and sometimes controversial topics for fear that it in some way can impact our performance reviews towards tenure, right? Now, obviously, I can only speak for myself. I believe that whatever topics we need to discuss that will ultimately inform and enhance the learning experience, the learning outcomes, and thus the practice skills that are needed once students leave our classrooms, and the protection of that, they need to be had. I don't make my decisions in the classroom based on whether or not it's going to impact tenure. I do think about, though, am I going to push someone far enough that they may go to my chair to say, like, Khalilah isn't being fair? But my role as an educator and a practitioner is to impart the knowledge that is necessary for people to go out into the world and to do just practice and just care. And you know, it may be naive of me, but I believe as long as you're doing right, everything will fall into its place. And if these universities are really backing up the kind of work that they say they want their faculty to do, then it shouldn't be a problem. And if it is, I was going to say call them to the carpet on it, but I recently learned, you know, how to call in versus calling out to say, you know, here are the reasons why we do this and why it's important for our students to grapple with these issues versus saying it's wrong that we don't do it, and try to open those lines of communication. So I hope I answer that question and is the fullness of it for the person who asked it. So thank you for that.
Let's lead into the next question, though, Dr. Johnson. Looking for some strategies for curriculum responsiveness.
You know, one of the things I think that's been very helpful for us in our division is really sitting down as a group and assessing what our practices are, right? What's in our syllabi? What sorts of activities are we doing? How inclusive have we designed our curriculum? And so, obviously I don't have a slide of this to share, unfortunately, but there was a very structured process that we went through that was actually shared by Dr. Lynn Wakeford on how to assess all of that so that we could make sure that our syllabi were representative and that we were also thinking about our students at every step of that curricular design. Later, I guess after this, if we're putting together some sort of resources to share, I will try to get that information from Lynn to include in part of that, so people can do those same exercises in their departments.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And we will actually be able to have a little bit of that discussion. Dr. Reyes Smith is going to be targeting some of those curriculum development techniques. So thank you also, Dr. Johnson, for offering to provide those resources.
Yeah.
All right, so to keep us on track, I'm going to move to our next presentation and welcome Dr. Kira Beal. Dr. Beal is the Department of Health Sciences and the Occupational Therapy Assistant Program Director at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas. Dr. Beal, do we have you running? Can we hear you?
Lots of Zooms.
Oh, there we are. Awesome. Perfect.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm going to approach this a little differently in the sense that Dr. Rebne knew that I'm working on a second doctorate. So my research is centered around diversity, but more or less looking at admissions. And I think if we look at diversity within the profession, the reason why I chose that as my area of study is we have to look at what our admission policies look at, what our procedures look at, are we being inclusive? And for me, personally, I've worked my history, been a clinician for 16 years. I was an assistant professor and academic fieldwork coordinator at a university for 6 years, went back to the clinic, and then lo and behold, became a program director to start a new OTA program. So I've had quite a history between university and college and seeing the differences of how procedures are done, how students of color as well as gender, and all of that has processed and how it bears out. So I'm going to share with you my research first, just to get the kind of background understanding, and then I'll share with you a little bit about what we do from an assistant side of our OT profession as far as admissions and why it's important to look at how you are, your procedures and your admissions policies look within your individual programs. Next slide, please. So the title of my research is Practitioner Perceptions Regarding Admission Practices' Impact on Ethnic Diversity in Occupational Therapy. So again, I wanted to look at what practitioners thought from the outside. So you've been through this process. You know what you went through, what your lived experiences were. I had individuals ask me why you didn't ask or take in information from current students. So I wanted to get the view from those who potentially assist with admissions, as well as those in the clinic who know what type of students we need in the profession. So I did explanatory sequential mixed methods, and to be honest, I am right now finishing up chapter 4 in hopes to defend before Thanksgiving. So I'm in the heart of finishing up all this analysis. My study, I had 125 participants complete the survey. I would love to do another study just to get more input, but you know, all of those who've gone through the doctoral program know you have to stop somewhere. I interviewed 16 individuals. Due to COVID, I ended up opening everything to the United States, so I was able to get participants from all over. I will say it was quite interesting as far as the ethnicity portion of it. I know for sure from my interviews, I only had one male participant and the rest were female, so that was interesting. But I did have a spread of Black, African American, Hispanic, Latina, Asian, and uh, that's it, and Caucasian white, excuse me, spread out for my interviews. So I feel like for me to answer my research questions, which I have 9, so I'm not going to read them all, but that enabled me to get a good live experience of exactly how individuals experience their admissions processes, etc. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give you an idea of what I was looking at as far as practitioner perception. So the survey was pretty basic, demographic information, and then just general, what kind of criteria did you experience in your admissions process, or what do you think should be in the admissions process? I dove a little deeper during the interviews and looked at asking questions in regards to admissions and equal opportunity, the concept of diversity and admissions, experiences with diversity, the differences between admissions processes experienced by minorities and non-minorities, and then the structure of admissions. I think after looking at everything, and my biggest key before I even started surveys and interviewing individuals, was looking at barriers. So I asked every participant who interviewed with me their definition of a barrier. And I think that's kind of important to ask yourself, how would you define barriers? And even within the university or college settings, to ask amongst each other, what do you define as barriers, before you identify what the barriers are. Most everybody talked about limitations on support or people not looking like them as parts of barriers. And I will say, I think one of the caveats to asking interview participants about barriers, when they know what the title of your research is, they tend to answer that question along those lines and not just in generic means. And then the biggest thing, which is relevant for our conversation today, is obtaining recommendations for admissions processes and increasing diversity within our profession. Next slide. So some of the main findings, everyone of all the participants agreed that all ethnicities should have equal opportunity to be admitted to OT and OTA programs, as well as having diverse cohorts. However, as I always say, and this is kind of off the record of my study, we do a lot of talking, but where's the action? So we do have to figure out, how do we, everything that we discuss, how do we put it to action? So some of the key things and findings of practitioners was a lack of visibility of ethnic background. So I think in some sense, we've tried to enhance that. Again, I'm in Texas, I'm familiar with Texas schools, but I know I've talked to a lot of individuals who still state they've been to universities or colleges throughout the country where they're the only minority. Or for instance, they walk into, say, an information session and they're the only minority or the only person of color. One of the other key perceptions is the need for understanding how socioeconomic backgrounds play a role in admissions. So I don't know about you all, but for us at my college, we're having a lot of discussion with everything being remote. Some of your students are living in one-room apartments with 10 people and one computer, and we're asking them to keep their video on. Or in the process of admissions, they may be struggling to get immunizations because it costs money. Things of that nature you have to consider. And those are some of the things that were brought up by the participants of the study. The structure of admissions, so looking at those quantitative pieces versus those qualitative pieces. When we look at what parts of admissions do we require for students to have, it's pretty important to think, again, going back to what our background of our students and the population and demographics that you market to, or populations that may be interested but sit back because they know that they can't really maybe afford it, may not have the transportation. They may, as far as qualitative, I had a lot of responses say I had to talk a certain way or I had to present myself a certain way. And that's, you know, we need to think about those things. The other key finding is barriers faced during the admissions process. So again, thinking about when a student comes, and I had some participants share with me that they didn't know how to dress, or when they were writing their essay, they just felt lost. So those are things that, again, if we, and I'm going to share some recommendations, if we look at the recommendations, they correlate to what the findings are of how we can fix these problems. But again, it has to be done. It can't just be talked about. And then the last one, big key finding that I've found through analyzing the data is positive relationships and mentorship. So I've been on a lot of these calls this summer between COTAD, AOTA, with all the diversity talks. And, you know, I, for one, need to sign up for COTAD to mentor. I've been saying that and just have not done it, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. Because the biggest thing that the problem is with students not feeling welcome, because again, I'm a Black woman, and I know and recall when I went through admissions process, I didn't feel like anyone else really understand where I was coming from. And that's where I'm getting, when I was reading the transcripts from my interviews and listening to the recordings, that's a lot of the comments is that people don't understand who I am as a person. So we just need to understand that. Next slide, and I think this will kind of sum up those findings to understand about recommendations. So I know a lot of schools right now are toying about observation hours, GREs, but of all the data I analyzed, everyone said, let's get rid of observation hours, let's get rid of GRE. Observation hours are great. However, the biggest thing that was said is the time it takes to get them, the expenses sometimes with transportation. Again, individuals are having to work just to be able to afford to pay for admissions fees, and or when they're in the program, if they get in, they're working ahead to be able to make it through the program. So it's just something to consider, and especially at least for us in the Houston area, it's been a challenge. So I know for my program, we've eliminated them. GRE, I know this was a big topic when I was an assistant professor in the OT program. Again, think about students and who you want to be in your program for it to be diverse. Not all ethnicities are able to do well on tests. And do those tests truly tell you about that individual to be an OT? It's just something to analyze. And again, this is just the recommendations that I received from those who interviewed for my study. The other thing is utilization of various media outlets for reaching out to all populations. So currently, a lot of the participants mentioned various means to, since we have Instagram, we have Facebook, LinkedIn, all these resources, we need to use them. I, for one, am one of those older individuals. I'm not old, but you know, I'm getting there. I've been out there a while. And for me, I have young faculty, and they have reached out with marketing using Instagram and things of that nature, and it's done great because you're able to go beyond and post your own diversified pictures, showing that there's other ethnicities that are part of the profession. I know AOTA has talked a lot about that. But again, where's our action? I peruse a lot of universities' websites just to see, because I'm curious. And it's the same pictures, and you're not bringing in those, you're not attracting other ethnicities if you don't show it. The video calls, one participant said, would be helpful just because they can see someone that looks like them and feel that they would be a part of the profession. Provide open houses and with the do's and don'ts. So it goes back to, how do I interview? How do I write essays? How do I dress? Those things we take for granted as practitioners because we've been there, but a lot of people do not know how to do that. They don't even know how to hold a conversation without freezing up, or when they sit in front of someone answering more than just yes or no. It sounds like you're going above and beyond to help, but we really need to do that if we want to diversify the profession. Another recommendation was utilization of clinicians to assist with admissions process so that there's more diversity represented. So again, you know, you may not have a diverse faculty on staff within your OT or OTA programs, but there are clinicians out there who will volunteer and assist with those admissions process. I know for our OTA program, we use our advisory council members to come in because they are from different ethnicities and genders to help with different processes of our admissions process. And then lastly, practice what is preached and constantly talked about. So again, taking action of what we have all these great ideas beyond just what I'm presenting for my study, but we have not, in my eyes, put forth enough effort to act upon it. And that's what I think needs to happen. And I know for the OTA program where I am, I've asked my faculty to look at, this is our first cohort, third cohort that we've had since I started the program, but the first one that has a 2 males, and we actually have representation from every ethnic group within the class. So, and I think that goes to show that we've been able to market and show that there's representation because our advisory council helps with some of our marketing endeavors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Beal, for sharing that information.
You're welcome.
Could we take a few moments now? Does anyone have questions for Dr. Beal?
There's been a few. Dr. Beal, the first question is, what are some indicators for feeling a sense of belonging beyond measures of diversity?
So I'm going to speak from participants' responses to things. And a lot of it is, again, not to repeat myself, but seeing someone that looks like you. Feeling that part where you have someone to connect with that looks like you, or again, I had a comment about speaks the language. So we all speak the same language, but it's relatable from environment that you grew up in.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. There's a few more questions that we have. Is there any evidence
Sure.
that undergraduate GPA correlates with graduation rates? I feel like we have a high GPA cutoff, but I think students with lower GPAs but have the potential to bring so much to the program are often dismissed.
And I have to agree with that. I have done, and I can't quote the authors of any of the articles, but I have researched some of that information as well as looked at it from my own program. And I actually, being a department chair, have several other health profession programs underneath me. So I'm able to see that. And it's very true that we are limiting ourselves in our programs by not bringing in those lower GPA students, because usually those are your shining stars as clinicians. And that's where the mentorship and prior to or during the admissions process is really, really important in guiding these students. And I speak of that from a community college perspective, where I actually go to anatomy and physiology classes and find out who's interested in healthcare fields, not just OT, but to get them to understand the importance of not just getting straight A's, but understanding the material so that they can shine in interviews and any of the processes that we may ask of them.
Thank you. Two more questions here, and then I see another one in the chat. So what do you think about blind interviews for admission?
I think in some instances, you just have to think about your environment in your population. So I'm in a heavy Hispanic population area. I'm not quite sure if blind interviews would be the best. I go back to understanding culture as well. So I'm not too keen on it, but I would be open to thinking about trying it just to see. I don't have enough research background to really truly answer that honestly. It's more personal opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then another question was, you spoke about teaching do's and don'ts of interviews, including like what to wear. I'm uncomfortable with this and promoting whiteness or a white way to interview. I would love to hear her thoughts on this and how to do this in a way that doesn't uphold a white way as the right way to interview.
Correct. So I personally, we're starting to work with on our campus career services so that we aren't presenting a quote unquote white way, because there isn't, but it's more of, do you wear jeans to an interview? Do you come, we had someone come in a baseball cap to an interview. It's not, I don't think it has to do with presenting whiteness. It's just etiquette and just general professionalism. So we're not telling our students to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, but just to give them those pointers that enable them to be successful. It's not a white way.
Thank you.
So I'd encourage you to match up if you have career services on your campus. Use your resources to help you out with those things.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Beal. And just for the sake of time, I am going to move us forward, but please hold on to that question if we have time at the end, or bring it to the small groups. With that, thank you again, Dr. Beal.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to introduce Dr. Cristina Reyes Smith. So Dr. Smith is actually one of the founding members of COTAD. She is currently on sabbatical as she is fulfilling her elected role in the AOTA Board of Directors. She is also an assistant professor and the OT admissions director at the Medical University of South Carolina. So Dr. Smith, have at it.
Hello, COTAD-ED. Thank you all so much for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with Dr. Beal and Dr. Johnson. And I am so delighted to see we have so many participants tonight. I was curious how many of you have participated with COTAD-ED presentations or functions in the past. Would you just put them in the chat for us so we can see who we are? We love seeing people come back and engage, and one of my favorite things has been to see you present and to see your publications out there. And you are the leaders currently and the future leaders of this area of not only our education, but as gatekeepers into the profession. So thank you for engaging around this topic, especially at this critical and crazy time. I know for us, this is the first week of classes. So it's a nutty time with all of that and online and everything, but thank you for making time to be here. So as Lexi mentioned, I recently moved into the board of directors position for the AOTA as a director, and thank you to those of you who supported that journey. I feel COTAD-ED, and this is one of the most important initiatives that we have in our profession right now, but I'm also thrilled to serve on the board, and so please don't hesitate to reach out to me in the future as needed in that capacity. So I want to talk, would you go to our first slide, please? I wanted to tell you a little bit about how at my institution we've been addressing some of these challenges related to racism and discrimination. And we still have a long way to go, but we have had some successes and some accomplishments that I'm happy to share with you. So holistic admissions, we made a transition about 3 years ago, and a part of that, an integral part, has been our interview days. And I was also curious, how many of you are interviewing applicants right now? Would you just put that in the chat for us? Okay, my chat might be a little bit delayed, but I'm not seeing a lot just yet. So I want to talk to you about why we chose to conduct our interviews. We saw it as an opportunity for recruitment, where a lot of times we're thinking about the faculty would say, we tried interviewing and we had the same people coming in. When we're interviewing people, we can recruit, we can look them in the eye, we can shake the hand prior to COVID, right? We can help them to feel welcome, roll out the red carpet, regardless of where they came from geographically, how they speak, what they look like. And so for us, interviews have been a really great way to convey to students that we want you here. We care about you. We are open to you. We're at an academic medical institution, which is the oldest medical college in the South. So there's a lot of history that goes along with the Medical University of South Carolina. And so we've worked really hard to have a presence, not only locally, but also across our state. From the university, we have a university diversity strategic plan that's been going on for the last 5 years. So we've been able to align many of our initiatives at our division level with that strategic plan, but we've also been able to align very much so with Vision 2025 and the Centennial Vision as well, to help to justify many of these initiatives to our faculty and to our administrators. So with the interview days, we took, it was actually one of my research groups, we talked about what were the top 10 characteristics we were looking for in future students, colleagues, and practitioners. And they were things like organizational skills, critical thinking, communication skills, leadership, service, cultural sensitivity, commitment to the profession. And we took these 10 characteristics and we ensured that our interview questions really conveyed and communicated the desire of those attributes that we were looking for. And so we have several questions related to what diversity or unique contributions would you bring to the program? What unique contributions or diversity would you envision for the future as a practitioner? So it really does play more of a central theme to our interview and admissions process that we're asking of all of our students. And we also take time that day to give them a tour of campus where they see our student life and they meet our student life and student diversity staff at the university level as well as at our college level. They meet with financial aid where they're able to talk to them about scholarships and loans and work study options. And then we also go to the wellness center so that they can see our state-of-the-art wellness facility to promote wellness and well-being for incoming students and really going into it with those retention practices and support aspects in mind too. So we have received very, very positive feedback about our interview days, and our students talk about how they feel like family with our faculty. And so I highly recommend that you explore that. We did a lot of research about holistic admissions from the literature before, and that was part of the cell. My supervisor is a metrics guy, and so I had to show him the data. And so we took information from PT and medicine and nursing, and so I encourage you to dig in and really strongly consider that. So we do look at academic experience. We do require the GRE, but we don't have a minimum. And from our experiences, our students do not have to do well on the GRE in order to be successful students and to be successful practitioners and graduate. We have one at Vanderbilt who really struggled with standardized tests for a long time, and she's been very successful as a clinician. Also this year, we made the transition to the OT Centralized Application Service, which many of you are already in. We're still rolling that out, and it is a little bit costly, but they have a waiver program available for students from disadvantaged financial backgrounds. So that is something to consider as well. In terms of recruitment, so one critical piece with our admissions that I realized, because the first year, so this is our first cohort for the occupational therapy doctorate program that we just, actually this is our second year that we just admitted in May. But the first year, we found that our interview pool was not as diverse as what we were hoping for. And when analyzing the data, I discovered that our underrepresented minorities and our males were overrepresented in the incomplete application pool. And so for whatever reasons, they were not completing their applications. One of the factors that I presume is that many maybe are the first in their families to go to college. Many of them are working potentially, or just not having kind of perhaps the same kind of support. And so we had a major overhaul of our admissions and recruitment communication efforts. So we revamped our website to be very explicit that we needed official transcripts, official GRE scores, official reference forms, so that applicants would know right off the bat that these were the expectations. We also strongly encourage them to apply early. I have seen data that underrepresented minority students tend to apply later in the cycle. And so sometimes there's not enough time to finish out those applications. Another critical aspect was just communication in general. We hosted on-campus info sessions for years, but for applicants who didn't have the means or the time to come all the way to campus, that was a barrier for them. So we started conducting online admissions webinars about 1.5 years ago, and we've been highly successful. My goal was to do it twice, and we ended up doing 10 over the course of a year. We've had great participation, great representation, and the feedback from prospective students has been wonderful. So with these different initiatives, we went from 75% completed applications to 95% completed applications. And I'm so thrilled to report that with this second cohort of the OTD students, we have the highest diversity of any class that we've ever had in our program in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. It included 5 African-American students, 1 Hispanic Latina, and 1 Asian student. So when it comes to the entry-level doctorate versus not, I'm really excited about the OTD. I think there's a lot to offer. I'm thrilled that these students are going to be equipped with doctorate level education and that they'll be that much more prepared to go back and lead in their communities and in our society at large. I want to echo what Dr. Beal mentioned earlier about marketing. It's really critical. I was very frustrated. Just this morning, someone from my marketing team who's redesigning our webinar flyers sent me a flyer, and there were 3 individuals in it, and they were all the same race. And not that I don't love all people from all races, but that was a problem for me. So she's reworking it, looking for a little more diversity to include in the marketing. But it's really critical that we are allowing prospective students and our current students in our classrooms to see others represented like themselves. So the stories and the case studies that are presented, the relationships with alumni, I'll never forget receiving an alumni letter from a different department in the College of Medicine. I'll share. There were 9 people in that 3-page brochure. They were all white males. And that's all. I'm going to leave it at that. And again, I love white males. I'm married to one, but you know what I'm saying with that. So at any rate, we also have what are called OT student ambassadors. And at our college level, we have ambassadors for each of the programs. So I went through our program 15 years ago where I was asked to participate in this panel or this Board of Visitors event or this photo shoot or whatever it may be. And it is what it is on top of my core academic work. And so it was challenging, made it work. Diversity was very important to me then, as well as the only Latina. I was one of 2 students of color in my class of 30 at that time. Now with the Student Ambassadors Program, students are able to receive recognition and put it on their resumes, their CVs, that they are student ambassadors, and it's esteemed. It's part of that commitment that they make is that they'll help out with now the admissions webinars and when we have photos and things like that. So if you're looking for a way to empower students in a leadership capacity, it's a really nice framework for that. We also recently were awarded a $3.5 million grant for student scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And this is through HRSA. We just found out in June that we were awarded this, and we're incredibly proud. It's gonna fund at least half of tuition for 12 students, almost 25% of our classes each year, and there is a focus on economically disadvantaged, but also a geographically disadvantaged. So our incoming students who have gone to Title I schools or are the first in the family, they will be eligible, as well as those who have families who have been living within 200% of the federal poverty line. So that is something we're very excited and very proud about as well. So Dr. Beal earlier was talking about the inclusive environment, Dr. Johnson too. Faculty and staff diversity is really critical. In our college right now, we have one African-American male, and that's a college-wide challenge in terms of our employees, We have students, but I almost got in trouble in this last month about calling this to the attention of our leadership. What kind of message does that send to our students about the priority of our institution? And going back to the structural racism and the barriers that are there, it's pretty evident to me that there are issues in our college that we're still continuing to work on. But again, as Dr. Johnson was saying earlier, kind of calling out versus calling in, I think that the crucial conversations that we need to have will continue. And it is harder in a COVID age where everything's online, but we'll get there. But at any rate, the engagement of the leadership is critical. Your program directors, and from looking at our data from COTAD-ED, people are kind of islands in the academic programs. There's typically one of you that cares about this overtly or has prioritized it as an important initiative. And so often we may feel like we are islands in our academic programs. And so being able to advocate and engage others is really critical. And now, if there's anything that came out of June in a good way for academia, it's people are listening around this. People want to do better, they want to engage, and they are much more open than they have been in the past, in my experience. So we had a survey, a college-wide survey several years ago, faculty, staff, and students around diversity and inclusion. A lot of our LGBTQ students reported overt discrimination and bias in the classrooms. And so having an inclusive approach, I think, is really critical. And then there is a lot of unconscious bias that was reported. Presence on social media was really critical. That came up from the student discussions too. And having that representation sort of throughout websites and Facebook pages, et cetera, et cetera. Having student diversity organization is really critical as well. That's why the COTAD student chapters have been phenomenal, but also having student diversity organizations outside of the OT profession, interprofessionally, are really critical, especially if you only have one or two underrepresented students in your cohorts. Would you go to the next slide, please? And Lexi, how are we on time?
We're doing pretty well. We were set to move into our break rooms in about 5 minutes, but I want to leave a couple minutes for questions for you. Okay. So thank you for asking.
I'll try to buzz through this next slide relatively quickly. Our faculty, we have had unconscious bias training. I'll be honest, I don't know how effective it was. I didn't do it. It was through a different entity, but we will continue with that. One thing that we did have that was really meaningful was some listening sessions with our OT students this past summer. And so that was a time for our students. We were all in tears, the first one in June, and the students have so frequently just said how much they appreciated having that opportunity. It wasn't just for our underrepresented students. All of our students were invited. All of our faculty were invited, and we had great representation. We had 3 over the course of the summer, and we're going to continue to do that, provide those opportunities for dialogue and collaboration and idea sharing. Having support for our faculty who are underrepresented is really critical. A lot of times, you've heard the stories that Dr. Johnson, Dr. Beal have shared with you about their experiences, and my experiences have been very similar. I've had really fun, interesting experiences I never anticipated, but it is what it is. But we also, with our strategic plan, we've been able to implement some goals there for our faculty, and one of which is that our faculty will attend some sort of national education or training through AOTA. I heard recently that the justice-based OT group will be featured at the Education Summit, which I think is phenomenal. Dr. Jaime Munoz is a colleague, and he's been one of the leaders for that group. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say around this topic, and especially the criminal justice system. From a curriculum development standpoint, so I've been able to conduct some educational research in this area over the past few years, specifically academic preparation for students working with diverse and underserved communities. First, just with OT, and then secondly, it was with more of an interprofessional health professions approach. And what we found was that the in-person opportunities and learning activities were really critical for our students. And if we think about Bloom's taxonomy with psychomotor and affective learning approaches, often we're leaving those out of our education and training for students. So we may be teaching them about health literacy or social determinants of health, but they're not really having those other lived experiences with patients where they're overtly reflecting about the impact of those factors for their clients, for their future clients as well. Having a diversity of guest speakers and adjuncts is really important and critical. We're trying to increase that even more so. And then the nice piece about that is we think about recruitment pipelines for students, but also recruitment pipelines for faculty are very, very important. And so reaching out specifically to talented students that you've had come into your program in the past, or clinicians that you may know of, or leaders from other areas, to bring them in as guest speakers, bring them in as adjuncts, and provide those opportunities for them. Hopefully you can pay them, but that's not always the case. I'm sorry, will you go back just one more quickly? There are some AOTA specific tools that are really critical, but also outside of the profession. I talked to the students, the OT practice framework culture appears at least 36 times in the 3rd edition. I haven't counted it in the 4th edition yet. But again, going back to the Vision 2025 and that whole impact, and now we have the 5th pillar there. And so I start every class session with the Vision 2025 for our students. I teach leadership and management of OT services. But some of these interprofessional healthcare resources are really critical so that the students see this is a healthcare thing. This is a healthcare issue. Health equity, social determinants of health, the class standards, all of these are really critical to healthcare at large. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So with research, the OTD capstone projects have provided incredible opportunities for growing in these areas. I have 3 entry-level OTD students. One is working on babies in the NICU from Spanish-speaking families. One is working on self-regulation in inner city schools with children and youth. And the 3rd one is working on rural communities providing telehealth services for children with Down syndrome. And I'm thrilled about that. We have post-professional OTD students as well who are doing similar kinds of topics. But this is where I really see the opportunity for expanding the capacity of occupational therapy in very, very unique ways. And this summer, in my first class on leadership and management, we had a large component on community-based practice and kind of out-of-the-box OT, outside of that traditional reimbursable model of care that's connected to insurance. And we had guest speakers who are OTs working with HIV community and working with prisoners, working with youth that were at risk for violence. And so those are the kinds of projects that our students can really be inspired by. Again, bringing in guest speakers or doing some research or showing them videos around these types of opportunities, because those are really ideal for the OTD capstone projects to help expand and provide services where they're not currently there. Health services research approaches, if you haven't heard about these, health disparities really fits within that context. We had a project related to children with Down syndrome, again, looking at rural communities and underrepresented minorities, looking at gender, age, and race ethnicity. But health services and utilization, our national health outcome indicators are terrible. If you've done any research into that, you've seen that. And so health services research, we can look at a lot of these service delivery factors like unconscious bias and cultural humility and inclusion, holistic admissions, all these different pieces for diversifying the workforce to help to address health disparities as an end outcome. Community engagement is critical. I don't know about your community, but my community is very diverse inherently. And so when we talk about community engagement, diversity is in there. And so we're trying to be more explicit about that. The Spanish language piece is really critical too, ensuring that our students are equipped to work with interpreters. And I was excited to hear the NBCOT exam now asks a question about Spanish language access and working with interpreters. So that's something we should be looking at, and those national class standards I mentioned earlier have really great resources around that. And then lastly is just that educational research project that I talked about. Global health was something that came up as an asset for students for growing in that cultural humility, cultural sensitivity and awareness as well, but also domestic service activities. And we have a CARES clinic. It's a free therapy clinic where our students provide services for uninsured and underinsured individuals in the community under the supervision of licensed clinicians. And so if you have opportunities for pro bono clinics, it's transitioning to telehealth here shortly. It'll be resuming. They took a hiatus for the summer, but also really terrific opportunities for our students too. And that's
awesome.
all I've got.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Reyes Smith. And so much fantastic information has been shared tonight. And I think what we're going to do at this time, just to make sure we give you all a chance to communicate with one another, share your questions with one another. A reminder, I heard we had some great questions come in the chat. We can try to bring some of that back when we return as a large group, but we wanted to give you a chance to talk to one another. So at this time, we're going to split into our groups. And so we posed a few questions there. One of the things I wanted to make sure to mention was that this is an action-oriented series. So we really want to make sure that you are coming up with something for yourself. And I gave it an OT goal mind frame of 4 weeks here. We want to make sure we have a timeline attached to what we are planning to do to initiate this movement within the different things we're connected to in our home program. So something you're going to do within the next 4 weeks, that action item, I want you to share some experiences that you're having in your home institutions. And then please in your groups, choose one person who'd be willing to share maybe 2 to 3 things that were main themes that came out of your breakout group. So Catherine, did you want to ask a few things? I just saw a message come through. Is there anything you wanted to add before we go, or share them for the big group?
There were a few really great questions during Christina's presentation, but if we're going to wait till after the small group chat, we can do that.
Do that, that'll work. Okay, sweet. All right, everyone hold tight. We'll be sending you into groups. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, there were some great questions, so we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, maybe wait till everybody's in their small groups, because I also need to get the broadcast the questions.
All right. See you later on.
Are you going into your small group? Stephanie, you might have to do the broadcasting.
Okay. Yep. I was trying to put somebody I know in
their communities. So for our OTD program, that has been our perspective. And I'll go ahead and address one of the other questions that came up that was really great too, in terms of students who are asked to be in photos that are not comfortable with that, or if they are perceived as tokens. And so that's where that student ambassadors has been really helpful for us. And that's important. We need to not guilt people into participating, or we also don't want to exclude them or single them out. We had a situation where someone was making making a big deal about getting the African-American male in a photo. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I wasn't involved with it at all, but at the same time, we need to be really conscious about the images that we put out there. You know, do our images say this is an academic program for white female students? Or do they say this is an academic program for individuals from diverse backgrounds? Because if students see it that way, that's from square one, those images are going to be very telling to them. And so it is a matter of trying to be realistic, but it also can be aspirational of this is what we want, this is what's important to us. And at the very least, having patients featured that are from diverse communities, from your local and your state background as well. And a lot of times it's going back to your mission, your organizational mission. You know, what is your purpose? Is it to serve your communities or is it not? And sometimes it's a matter of having those heart-to-heart conversations with your leadership and your marketing team too, for that matter.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Cristina. We do have a few other questions.
Thank you. I was wondering if maybe before we go to our next question, I'm wondering if each individual who was sort of the representative from their group would be willing to add their 2 to 3 main ideas in the chat, because I'm wondering if we'll see some consistencies there. So let's start working on that while we move to our next question here. So please use the chat to enter some of those main things from your group. All right, Catherine, next question.
Lexi. So thanks for that. If any of the other presenters have thoughts on pictures, there was a comment in the chat about that, how programs can better represent and encourage diversity through marketing without tokenizing students. And then to add on to that, for Dr. Johnson and Dr. Beal and Dr. Reyes, would any of you qualify any of the work you're doing as decolonizing, dismantling existing power structures and systems?
I would say no. I like to think about my work as helping to provide meaningful change for the betterment of our student body, our faculty and staff, and ultimately our communities. And going back to Vision 2025, I see my work, our work, as helping us to move towards that vision of OT for all people, populations, and communities. And from the Centennial Vision, meeting society's occupational needs. Sorry.
No worries. I would have to kind of piggyback with Dr. Smith. My vision and my premise is to provide information for others to grow, and for us to grow to be a diverse and inclusive and equitable profession, because in all honesty, it has not been there inclusively, and we need that. So I'm definitely not degrading anything or looking at it from a negative view, as for being able to contribute to help with those strategies that we talk about all the time.
Yeah, I share the same sentiments as Drs. Smith and Beal in regards to some of the work being providing space for meaningful conversations around these topics. But I do believe that my work in particular does address the decolonization of racist methods in research, but in terms of dismantling racism in our educational programs and in our universities, that is not the work of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Like, we don't exist in these spaces to do that work. The issue is not ours. Truly, to dismantle racism in our institutions, our white colleagues have to step up and do that work. Those who benefit from it are the ones who can dismantle it. I mean, we can speak to it. We can give power to space for those discussions, but the power to truly dismantle these systems doesn't lie on us in our labs. So.
Thank you for that, Dr. Johnson. And now we've got one small question and one big question. So I'm going to lump them together for any of our panelists to answer. The small one is, has anybody heard of any admissions committees made up primarily of patients, clients, or healthcare users? And then the big question is, do you have any suggestions that could address course design or curriculum content that would be helpful?
That is very interesting. I do not know of any institution that, consumers and clients, patients, just, community members sit on admissions group. But if the person who asked the question have you seen that? I'm curious.
So I asked the question, this is Mary Lynn. I haven't seen that, but I feel like when you're you're participating in your field work, the client feedback is often the most accurate. And as a clinical educator, when you're watching your student interact with a client and the client's giving them feedback, whether that's verbal or nonverbal, it's so powerful. And I feel like clients could, I don't know, that they could have something very big to contribute there in terms of admissions. I haven't seen it. It's just a thought I had, but I was just wondering if anybody else has had that experience.
I have not seen that in the literature. That doesn't mean it's not a good idea. So maybe a line of research in the future. We do have clinicians who serve in our interviews. We have 2 faculty and 1 clinician for every prospective student that comes through. And so that has been helpful. I will say that last year we did feel like there was, I'll say, a discrepancy between the 2 faculty were raving about an underrepresented student and the clinician was not. And so we had to make a judgment call there as to how we were going to handle that. But we tried to provide training upfront about this is our purpose and this is what we're trying to do. We want everyone to feel welcome. And so I think we still have work to do in that area, but from our faculty, because it's the faculty who have really been making the decisions about what our interview process would look like. We kind of had our proposal and then they modified it. But our strategic plan, holistic admissions, was a part of that. And that's why the strategic plan is so important, getting diversity, equity, and inclusion into your OT program strategic plan, into your college, into your university as much as possible, because then it's on paper. Then faculty have to tie their goals to aspects of the plan, and there's much more accountability with that. And with accreditation, we are hoping to get a little more accreditation teeth behind diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And we had a motion go through the Representative Assembly last year. It has been tasked to the new AOTA Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force. So hopefully we'll be hearing something about that in the future. I also want to give a quick plug, sorry, the AOTA Education Special Interest section is going to be hosting a series of sessions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll be monthly. So stay tuned for more details on that through the AOTA website.
Okay. So there have been so many great questions posed in our groups, and the things that we're seeing coming through on our chat. Again, it looks like many were able to, thank you to those who were able to share personal experiences. And I think it would be awesome if we can make this available. There's some really great things if you have a chance to read through and see some of the consistencies around impacting policies, sharing conversations, the groups impacting change that are made up of students and faculty together, and how to share those conversations with faculty members. And a lot of these different items are things we are hoping to continue to discuss in this series. Starting the pipeline program I just saw, so pathway models. These are things that we're going to try to continue to discuss in this series this fall. So please continue to attend. We're going to try, we will make this resource available, and I want to find a way to make the chat. Does the chat become available too with the recording, or is this the way we would have to do this separate, huh? Stephanie, we'll make it happen some way. Try to make it happen. So with that, I'd like to move into our closing. We want to make sure to be mindful of our time, and for many of you who've attended from so many different places across our country. And so I wanted to call one more time upon the Ignite, sort of the vision behind this Ignite series, Dr. Rame and Verisade, to give a few closing remarks.
Thank you so much. This is exciting. I'm going to make it quick so we can get off on time, but I'm just so grateful to be able to close this out. And I want to say we are in a new day. We are in a new day. As more and more of us are developing holistic admissions, we also have to keep in mind that it does not stop there, you guys. We must develop holistic curricular design, instruction, and evaluation. Occupational therapy education has been using predominantly white curriculum taught by predominantly white educators to predominantly white students. And as we welcome a more diverse and equitable and inclusive student body, and as our world continues to shift from minority to majority, we have to ask ourselves, how are we as educators moving the needle forward to decrease health disparities and bridge those gaps? As a director of admissions myself, who within my first year in this role has established holistic admissions, I am proud to share that we admitted one of the most dynamic cohorts ever. This is the first cohort that was ever established or was ever admitted holistically in the history of my institution. And I say this not to brag, I say this because these changes are critical. They're critical, and there needs to be a sense of urgency to develop best practice within your institutions. And it does not take years to analyze data. Rather, it takes action to get this established for your next application cycle. More importantly, we can't simply silo admissions being holistic, but we have to integrate recruitment and retention as part of the entire holistic process. And as we move towards holistic admissions, you must be prepared to review your curricular design so that the admitted students not only can relate to the material, they can also see representation of themselves, but also be set up for success. What we are excited about is that more and more educators are seeking resources and are trying to develop the skill set to have a more fully integrated holistic process. It is our hope through the Ignite series and through COTAD-ED that you will feel even more equipped to proceed forward with holistic education. My main mission that I repeat on a daily basis to myself, to my team, to anyone who will listen, is to decrease barriers and increase access. And as I leave with you today, as we leave today, our charge for you is to consider this same model and ask yourselves, how are your programs decreasing barriers and increasing access? Our expert speakers today have shared their role in decreasing barriers and increasing access, but they have also encouraged us, as well as all of you who have been participating, to ignite change in occupational therapy education. So we look forward to you joining us for the next event, which will be about fieldwork. And as always, we thank you so much for all of your same energy. Remember, keep that same energy always. And I leave here today with this quote: race and racism is a reality that so many of us grow up learning to just deal with. But we ever hope to move past it, it can't just be on people of color to deal with. It's up to all of us, Black, white, everyone, no matter how well-meaning we think we might be, to do the honest, uncomfortable work of rooting it out. My forever First Lady, Michelle Obama.
Absolutely.
Lexi, I leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Verizade. Fantastic. So please feel free, please continue to follow COTAD. We'll have, again, these sessions available, continue to connect with you. Our next slide, Stephanie, is an event coming up we have next week, and in addition to the resources, this is a comprehensive list of resources we also have available on our COTAD website. Initiative we just started was the COTAD Book Plus Club. So for those of you who might be interested in additional platforms to have discussions focused around media related to racial justice and anti-racism, this is a new series open to anyone who's interested. So check our website for that. But again, thank you all for joining us this evening. It has been a fantastic night, and thank you to our presenters again for being here, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Beal, and Dr. Reyes Smith. We genuinely appreciate your time, and to many who contributed. So we'll see you in a couple weeks for our next event, field work issues related to racism and discrimination. We're going to have, again, some great presenters and time for discussion. So September 17th, 6 o'clock p.m. Central. We'll see you then. Thank you for being here, and have a good night.
And thank you.